Welcome to the Board of County Commissioners work session on Central Services and Information Technology, the 2021-22 rates. By way of introductions, I'm John Hutchings, the chair of the board. Also present is Commissioner Gary Edwards, and Commissioner Ty Menser will be joining us momentarily. He's in the office. We have County Manager Ramiro Chavez and a host of people that I see on my screen. And I don't have anybody even off screen that might be here. Do you want to introduce them, Ramiro, for me?
Yes. With you have...
Oh, I see Robin. I'm sorry, Robin. I see it now.
Go ahead, Ramiro.
Yeah, you have Robin. You have Bruce Rodball, Jetty Silva, Dennis Osorio, Jason Ashley, and I'm missing somebody. Oh, there he is. Gina Brennan and Brian Ferris.
And I see that we've added Commissioner Ty Menser, the vice chair of the board. And we are ready to begin the topic on Central Services and IT 2021-22 rates.
So
who's gonna grab it?
I will have Robin to kick this off. This is a yearly event, or who's going to take the lead? Is it Robin or Dennis?
Begin. So today we are reviewing, as we do every year at this time, the rates that are set by Central Services and your Information Technology Department to bill all of our customers, which are county offices and departments, for the services that they receive throughout the year. State law requires that we update these rates annually. That's a directive from the state auditor and best practices in accounting. And these rates reflect the services that offices and departments use. We'll walk you through what those services are this morning. I'm not sure who has control to show the slides.
I would imagine Ramiro does, but I don't know.
I don't know who's got
Amy said I should be able to, so I'll give it a try.
Okay.
You should be able to share your screen without me giving you the host rights. We fixed that.
So while Jenny brings that up, what we're going to do this morning is so I'll be walking you through the rates for Central Services, and then Dennis will walk you through the rates for Information Technology. And as I go through, I'll ask staff to chime in on anything that I don't happen to have handy.
Can you see the slide?
Nope, we still see your cute dog.
Ah, it's the wrong screen. Better?
Yeah, that's better.
Yep, there we go.
Okay.
So go ahead and start the show, Jenny, and go to slide 2. So we'll be talking about our rates, and what we'll be doing is asking you to approve the rates. Central Services and Information Technology, along with Human Resources and Financial Services, create our rates ahead of the rest of the budget so that offices and departments have this information when they are preparing the budget for the following year. We need to have our work finished in June, and we try to do it in time for the call to budgets. Overall, what you'll hear from us today is that in Central Services, the rates have increased by 20.6% compared to this year, and Information Technology rates have increased by 5.3%. We'll explain all of that to you. And since we're preparing a biennial budget, We also did the estimates for 2022, and those rates were inflating by a factor that is based on each specific program and the increase history of those. Go ahead, Jenny. In central services, as I've said, our customers are offices and departments, and we provide the kinds of services that you just can't operate without. If you think a moment about the type of work that we all do countywide, could you do it without a phone? Could you do it without an office? Maybe you could do your work without a computer? Probably not. These are all of the kinds of things that central services and IT provide. They include building maintenance, fleet, operations, phones, computer, reserves to keep our buildings in repair. I started to say good repair, but we'll have that conversation in a few minutes. But these services need to be billed out so that the burden is not on the general fund. And that's really your option. We can develop rates and bill every fund across the county, or we can have central services paid 100% out of the general fund. There is a third option, and that's for every office and department to have their own unit that does these things and pay for their own, but that is extremely inefficient. So having internal rates and a central organization that provides these kinds of services is the most efficient and effective way to provide the services and to manage the costs. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do we develop the rates? The accounting standards are clear. The state law requires a fair and equitable allocation. So we look at our costs, and based on what the cost is, we develop a way to allocate those costs across all of our customers. And they're a little different depending on what kind of service it is. So if we're allocating the cost of, let's say, our servers or our email systems, we take the total number of computers, how many is in each office or department, and do a percentage of the total cost based on the number of computers. That's how we would allocate that. In cost for building reserve, it's allocated by square footage occupied by each office and department. So the rates are developed using best practices in cost allocation and divided amongst all of the agencies, which in turn ensures that every fund is paying its fair share.
Real quick, I just want to add, could I add to that real quick, Robin? We do through March and April also, we do inventories of all of these cost centers and we send them out, we post them on SharePoint. So every office and department then comes and reconciles those numbers to make sure that we're on the same page, both office and department and the internal service. So everybody has input before we move forward to here. Just wanted to touch.
Thanks for filling that in, Dennis. That's an important factor. We don't just decide. We work closely with all of our customers. So now going through the specific rates. In central services, there are a few different cost centers or funds that we bill the costs out. The first one is administration and operations. That pays for things like you'll see records, management, mail room and mail delivery. We operate the facilities out of this fund. And that includes leases for our lease space and payment for the utilities as well as maintenance of the buildings. There's a 6.3% increase, and the major places in the budget that were increased are record center costs went up by $36,000. Mail and postage actually went down a little bit, $3,000. M&O of the facilities increased by $24,000. That's mainly supplies. Custodial increased by $170,000. The board approved a new contract with custodial services, and that is the amount that it went up. And while I'm talking through the rest of this slide, I'm going to ask Jenny if she could, without changing her screen, if she could look up the total cost of the custodial contract. Our utility costs have gone up. That's the cost for electric and water in these buildings. And our leases, we've signed new leases for some of our lease space. That's increased by about $19,000. In all, the increase to the general fund is $292,000. The increase in non-general fund or across all of our other funds is $164,000. And in non-county agencies, that actually went down a little, and I believe that is because we have lost one of our tenants in a leased space. So any question about the administration and operation rates?
I do. Do the seatmates have a question? Don't see any hands up. My question is regarding the facilities and custodial rates. We just signed a new contract, 170,000 plus. Is that COVID related for next year? Is that tell me, please.
So Jason, can you speak to what's included in the increase in the custodial contract?
That is not COVID related. That was an increase of adding one additional custodian that was not in last year's budget.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. Thank you. No other questions. Proceed.
All right. Then next slide.
Sorry, guys. I'm new at this.
You're doing fine.
Oh, it went over to the wrong screen. Sorry.
Here we go. The building reserves, thank you, Jenny. You're doing great. The building reserves is the biggest area of increase in central services. And the reason for that is that we have not been putting enough money in our building reserve fund to repair the buildings, even the most essential functions in our buildings. And we've been spending down the building reserve at a somewhat alarming rate. So what you see here, the bulk of the increase in building reserves is for the family and juvenile court building. Over the next 5 years, we're going to need about $5.5 million to repair systems in that building that are already starting to fail. The hydronic heating system is currently failing. The heat and ventilation air handler is at the end of life. We expect it to fail within the next 5 years. The heating and ventilation control system, we can't even find parts. So if it breaks, we are in trouble there. And in detention, the touchscreen access system is past its useful life. So all of these systems together, we're not saying that they need to be fixed next year, or this increase would be quite a bit more. What we're saying to you is that we need to set aside about $1 million a year every year to be able to make these repairs. So the big increase here is for family and juvenile court. There are small increases for other buildings, but I did want to note that we did not increase the rates for buildings 1 through 6 here on the Capitol campus, the courthouse campus. And the reason that we didn't do that is because the amount of money that we need for these buildings is greater than the need at the FJC by far. And we think that what we're going to do in these buildings needs to be part of the Plan B for the courthouse. And since we did not have a new courthouse on the ballot this year, we're going to need to stay in these buildings longer, and we need to address what we're going to do about that. So any plan for these buildings 1 through 6 should be part of Plan B. Yes, Commissioner.
Well, my comment is good information regarding the FJC, but it'd be nice, even though we may be moving on with a Plan B for the campus, I would like to have the kind of a rough cut estimate of what 1, 2, and 3 would entail. If we're talking about 1, 2, and 3 predominantly in a Plan B, whatever Plan B may be or morph into, kind of a cost of what would it be to maintain, until we get there, to maintain the current state of affairs.
So Jason, do you have that number handy, or is that something we can get back to the board on?
I have some rough numbers available on what it would cost to basically replace the current systems for like new systems.
Well, rather than go ahead, Jay. I don't want to cut you off, but rather than take the time to do that now, do my seatmates, are you interested in that information too? Cost comparative, okay.
Yeah.
So if you want, you can address it in a moment or two if you have the time, if it's short and sweet. Otherwise, just email it to us.
Okay, I will gather all that information and email it to you guys later today.
Thank you, because if a Plan B doesn't take place for 2 or 3 years, it'd be nice to know what's going to take to maintain this doggone facility, keep it up, so it's
Right.
functional for citizens.
It will be shockingly high.
How old is that FJC building?
22 years.
22 years.
Go ahead, Ty.
Robin, you probably explained this, but I want to hear it again so I'm clear. The rates that relate to building reserve, does that tailored in any way by what building you're in, or is it spread out evenly across the different county facilities?
No, it is the former. We determine the rates based on the building that you happen to be in. So for the FJC, the occupant is Superior Court and juvenile detention. And we determine the square footage for each of those. The juvenile is weighted because it's a 24/7 operation. And then we also look and say, what are the repairs that are going to be necessary over the next how many years? You see a 5-year span here. We focused on the short term right now because we like to look at 10 to 20 years. But if we did that, these rates would be even higher. So we focused on a shorter term, and then depending on what that building needs, the costs are billed, if you will, to the tenants of that building based on a square foot allocation. Did that make sense?
It does, but then in terms of, well, I guess when you said at the beginning that the rates have gone up by X percent, that would be different by department then, because they're in different buildings.
That is correct. The overall increase is specifically, when we add it all together, here's your total rates are going up by about 65%. But if you look at each and every building, for example, the tenants in buildings 1 through 6 in this rate proposal will see no increase at all. The FJC is going to see an increase of, I'm just going to, make a guess, 200% maybe.
Okay.
Averages out.
That was my question. Thank you.
Yep. And you also see that the general fund increases by over $1 million. That's because the FJC, Superior Court and Juvenile, are billed to the general fund.
Gary, any follow-up?
No,
Okay, press on.
Alright.
Thank you.
So next slide, Jenny, is ER&R. The ER&R maintenance and operation is billed a little differently than the rest of central services. And I think that we've talked before when we've talked about internal service rates. I've shared with you that internal service rates can be billed in one of two ways. You can either do it in a prospective fashion where you estimate what your costs are next year and then determine what the rate is to collect the money in that year, and at the end of the year you reconcile. Or you can do it retrospectively, where you determine how much you actually spent in a prior year, and that's how much you bill out next year. Most of central services is billed prospectively, but ER&R M&O is retrospective. So what you see here in 2021 are the actual costs that offices and departments incurred in 2019. It's on what you will hear me refer to as a 2-year lag. So costs in 2019 are billed out in 2021. And we keep careful records of how much each office or department incurred in their equipment maintenance costs. And then we have the ER&R replacement reserve. That is our rolling stock, if you will, and large equipment. And the contributions into that fund, as we've talked about before, we calculate every year. Bruce meets with the customers, each office or department, and says, here are the vehicles or the equipment that you pay for in ER&R. Here are the replacement schedules. Do these still make sense? Maybe you're not using a car as much as you thought you would, so that car's useful life can be extended a year. Or maybe something happened to a different car and the maintenance costs are higher than the cost of replacing it. So they have those conversations every year. Based on those conversations, Bruce works with the customer to determine how much it will cost to replace the equipment on a reasonable schedule. So we review that every year. And what you see here is an increase in the replacement of equipment and what that will cost in 2021.
I have a question on ER&R, and this is probably the best time to ask it. Did with going through our 2% budget reductions countywide, did we sweep this fund to, and I don't mean swept, maybe I'm not using the right word, to reduce our budget overall?
Yes, this is the fund, the ER&R replacement reserve, where the board has directed us to reduce the 2020 contributions to the reserve fund. And part of that direction was to make that up in the following 4 years. So what part of what you see here in the rate increase is an increase to make up for the lack of reserves that will be collected in 2020.
So is this for 5420 or 5410?
That is in 5420.
20, okay. And then with that, the contributions from offices and departments going into the ER&R, is that they're varying, staggering amounts that are contributed to that fund, because some don't have any vehicles, some have several vehicles, like the sheriff's office.
Yes.
So then we asked, and I'm trying to get from A to B and to C and D in a minute. It seems that so we asked the departments to take a factor in and report back to us a 2% reduction in their budget. And when it schooled me on this, that the sheriff department wanted to go and do a 2% reduction and wanted to take it from the ER&R, but was told because of his lack of discretionary funds, that was already taken. He can't factor that in. He has to find it elsewhere. Is that factual?
Yes, that's correct.
And so the ER&R fund, now that equals about $280,000 out of the sheriff's budget.
The amount of the reduction
Yeah.
is probably considerably more than that.
If you,
I
if
would
you
have
have
to look
corrections.
that up.
What, Romero?
Are you asking the 2% reduction that's out of the ER&R on the sheriff's
Uh-huh.
office?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it will be more because it has to include corrections.
Okay.
The corrections reduction is separate.
Yeah, but combined from the sheriff's office is both.
The 278 or so thousand, it is reflective of both. Okay.
No, we'd have to look that up.
No, please don't walk away with
Yeah,
the number.
don't fixate on
Okay.
a number. I can't confirm it in the moment.
And I've said this before in other budget discussions over the last 3 years, that in my opinion, all things are not equal when it comes to budget. Because of legal mandates by and large by itself. So I was just wondering if that was an equitable way to sweep the funds, if the majority of it comes from the sheriff's office and he needs to find additional cuts elsewhere where he may not have that 2% fat.
So
I'm just supposing
suggest
out
to
loud.
you, Commissioner, that no office or department has that 2% fat. And the sheriff's budget is reduced for ER&R contributions in proportion to how he uses that fund, just like any other office or department.
Okay.
I do want to bring something up to follow up on what the chair is saying.
Go ahead.
The situation that we find ourselves in as a society today, I am not going to be in favor of reducing the sheriff's budget at all. So how that is going to be worked out, where you said that all things are not equal, that is very true. So whether we allow him to make that cut out of the ER&R, that's extending the use of a vehicle is one thing that I could probably be okay with. But I'm not going to be voting to cut the sheriff's budget in any way, shape, or form at this point in time. And I'm actually going to be looking at the prosecutor's budget as well, and possibly even the auditor's budget, because we have some serious election issues coming up. So just food for thought as we go into our next hour.
All right. Commissioner Menser, anything? Any questions or comments?
No.
Okay. Go ahead, Robin. Thank you.
Okay. So I believe that the next part of this just adds it all up for the total. So go ahead and go to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Dennis.
Good morning, Dennis Osorio, IT Director. So I'll be going through our three funds. We'll be starting off, this is our main fund. I think this is over 80% of our budget. It's 5250. And this is all of our operations. So it's the bulk of our salaries, licensing, both in IT, telecom, and GIS. We got a 5.5% increase for this. And if you go through, I kind of just put the high level bullets in here, and it's normal. I don't like having it this wordy, but then you guys could reference this later on if you have other questions or if you want to look back at it. So if you look at it, the biggest increase is in our IT portion, a 7.4% increase. And the biggest portion of that is the prosecutors and public defense new case management system. That's been approved. That should go live next year. The reason we're not seeing a savings is because next year, as you come live with a new case management system and you have an old case management system, they often overlap. So we're going to have to pay the licensings on the new one as well as the old one, probably for a year, to make sure that we get all the data moved over and those are operational. It's pretty standard when you're talking about heavy data systems. They normally have at least a year overlap. If you guys remember the ERP, we would have done something very similar. So that's a $201,000 increase. Microsoft licensing, which we talked about earlier this week, which was a $46,000 increase. Court video replacement support for that will be a $30,000 increase. The next one, our department software to IT, we moved, this is kind of just a shift. We just centralized, most of this was already coming out of offices and departments, and we moved all the licensing just to IT, so we're managing it. So we kind of have one stop, and so we're moving that's 68,000 that got moved over to us. We have new administrative positions. So one other thing to state on that, depending on what the cuts are in the positions, and once that's all finalized, that number can go away possibly, actually likely. And then we had under collection from last year of 100,000 in IT. And at any point, if I'm going too fast, please feel free to stop me and let me know if you have any questions. For GIS, we had a rebate of 240,000, and that's mainly because last year we had a lot of vacancies in that team. We are currently fully staffed, but last year we had multiple vacancies and we had some turnover. Telecom is a 21.1% increase. So we have additional maintenance for our VoIP system, so our telephone system that everybody uses in the office. And then going into the new variable charges, the sheriff charges is very similar to the other one. We moved the sheriff's bills just so we could centrally manage it in IT. So we were already paying that, but the sheriff was paying it directly before. Now it'll go through us and then go to the sheriff's. That's 78,000. We have new cell charges of around 35,000. And as you can see, I put in parentheses there. That does not include the increase of COVID. These numbers were before the pandemic hit. And there was a significant increase in more cell phones during that. But I just want to make sure we frame that. That is not including the pandemic additional phones that were needed. Net motion for the sheriffs, that's how their new MCTs are going to reach back into the network and be wireless and still be able to use county resources. And then we have some new circuits, which were also brought to the board. Both Medic 1 has a circuit and Solid Waste has a circuit, and those are billed directly back to those areas. These are not every single increase within these areas. These are just the high level ones to kind of give you some context of what we're talking about. So, was there any questions on that other slide? Sorry.
No, any questions, commissioners? Nope. No. Thank you, Dennis.
All right, that's the big change. This one, we go on to our next fund, IT 5260. That's our IT reserves, are a 7% increase, and that's mainly around the court replacement. If you remember when we bought that court replacement video system, it was more than what we had collected, so we needed to keep collecting what we were collecting and actually add on to that to make up the difference. So that's a $75,000 increase. And then the 5240, that's our large system replacement reserve, and there is no changes to that. That is something that we will need to change. As you know, we've came multiple times with estimates that this fund is not meeting the requirements when we do start replacing these systems, but I understand that's going to have to be put off and we'll have to deal with that a different year. All right, so if you look at it, this is just our rolled up slide. We have a 5.3% increase. You've seen in the very first slide. Of that, 514,905 is general fund. And as you can see, that's mainly because of when we're talking about anything to do with the courts, the prosecutor, those are all general fund hit areas. And that's where all of our big cost increases were from. Non-general fund is 12,000, and then non-county agencies 293. I would say the only other thing is obviously we still are waiting for some direction on some of the positions and whatnot, and we put forward those amendments. So depending on that decision, it could affect the rates. They would never go up from that decision; it would just go down.
Okay, any questions, commissioners? No?
No.
I have one question, and it goes back to what we were just talking about with ER&R. I'm trying to go back in my notes. The ER&R reductions that we swept, give me a better word than using swept. Is there one, Robin? Reduced? Okay, then the rates coming for next year, have we proposed, we haven't proposed anything, any sweeping of that ER&R fund for next year, have we, for 21 or 2022?
No, not at this time.
And if there were an
In
increase,
fact, when you made the decision, part of the decision on the reduction this year was with the knowledge that we would need to make that up in future years to be able to afford to replace our equipment out of this fund.
so departments that had funds removed from ER&R, if I'm saying it properly, will be paying an increased rate in the next 2 years to make up for that loss.
That's correct. The
Okay,
next
but
4 years. 4 years.
The next 4 years, but we don't have any plans to take money from that fund again to meet budget reductions or fund balance.
So you have not discussed how you will address any shortfalls for 21 and 22. That'll be part of your budget discussions for this fall.
Oh, I can't wait.
But,
Very tongue in cheek.
But
you.
Commissioner,
Yes.
if you may recall the conversation that you had when you took an action to reduce the ER&R rates for 2020, as you may recall, there was a robust conversation because the reduction on that fund is not sustainable in the long term, because eventually we need to replace that equipment. We need to replace sheriff vehicles as well as public works. And I believe Commissioner Edwards was the one who was walking us through the kicking this down the road as a way to minimize the budget is not sustainable.
Correct. And I do remember that. I do recall that. And that's why my concern was if we've taken 2% from that, taking a percentage from that fund, which equates to a certain percentage from each office and or department, and now they're gonna have to kick in more money to offset that over the next couple of years. I'm just looking at the numbers make sense, the bottom line does, but the equity of it and sustainability of that plan, I have to question, only because I don't have a complete understanding as you do, Robin, or your team regarding that. And I do understand, especially the liability of replacing vehicles, whether it be a sheriff or public works, because of safety issues, and extending the life can be more dangerous to the individual, the employee driving it. There's many things that come into to play in factoring that in. And I just don't want to get any office or department to suffer a double ding where, okay, we're taking that money now, but you have to make up for it in the next couple of years and maybe potentially come up with another budget reduction somewhere else.
So the board is not asking any office or department to absorb the costs of the payments into reserves. The
So actual reduction.
amount of their budget, and this is why part of the budget reduction instructions say that they cannot reduce anything that's in an object 5.9, which are internal service costs. Because the amount that is placed in any office or department's budget is enough to cover those payments that they have to make for internal service rates. They have not been asked to absorb those costs for, I think that in the 2013 or 14 budget, they had to absorb increases in internal services without an addition to their budget. But since that time, every year, budgets have been, their appropriation authority is increased so that they have the money to pay for internal services. When the reduction to the contribution to internal services, ER&R in this case, goes down, their appropriation goes down in an equal manner. It's not an impact to the ability to do any other service in their office. And it is a fair way of allocating cost because offices and departments only pay for those vehicles that they own and use.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Anybody, go ahead.
I have to make a comment in that regard that it does affect their ability to do the job long-term if we extend out the life of items. Now, that might not be true with a typewriter, but when it comes to vehicles, while I was sheriff, we extended the life. Then we sold those cars with extended miles on them. And one of them, the A-frame fell off when the new buyer was driving it down the road. That wasn't quite as detrimental to the county as if a deputy would have been driving that same car down the road and going 90 miles an hour or something and run into somebody. So there is a downside to that. And that's why I want to make sure that certain items, so all things are not created equal, I guess, following up on what the chair said in regards to this whole budget situation. As we move forward on this, and I suppose we're gonna go into our next budget meeting, and I can do more follow-up there, but you've all heard me talking about this bubble that was gonna come from sales tax for at least a year now, or over a year. And in fact, it did develop at the end of our ending fund balance for 2019. Between that and what we refer to as the accrual, which in essence is just a delay of money coming in, but it's going to be continued money coming in from now on. That accrual, it may be affected by some type of a reduction in sales tax, for an example, but nonetheless, it's going to be very similar. And I'll just use the company Amazon as an example, because they did a lot of shipping of product to locations during this pandemic. They really were not affected when it comes right down to it. There's a possibility that our sales tax revenue is not going to be as dramatically affected as been projected. So I'll be getting into that as we go into our next budget cycle, but I think we ought to think about that as we review what we had asked those offices maybe to make reductions in. And like Commissioner Hutchings said, we stole the money out of the ER&R fund that they'd contributed, and I'm going to specifically refer to the sheriff because he's got the biggest fleet in that regard, and then told him to come up with the budget. I've been reviewing that. I'm having second thoughts about that. Looking forward to have that discussion.
Okay, Commissioner Mensah, anything?
No.
Okay. Robin, thank you. Dennis, thank you. And thank all of your team for
So
providing this.
I believe we need direction from the board.
Oh, we do?
Yeah,
Okay.
because the call for budgets is next week, where the auditor and myself will release instruction as to how we need to start preparing the 2021-22 budget. And as you may recall, this a direction from the board that needs to provide on those rates before the call for budgets.
Is that
You're
going
looking for a thumbs up or down on the increase of rates?
On the proposals, yes.
okay? So we're not taking a vote. It's just thumbs up or down of if we want to move forward as presented, right?
Right.
Okay, let me make a comment on this. I am not willing to give a thumbs up to this moving forward with the reduction from the ER&R fund as talked about, specifically to the sheriff's office. So I've got other concerns with the auditor and the prosecutor, but I guess I'm not ready to delve into that. But I am not going to go ahead and give this a thumbs up. Now, the democratic process might allow this to continue if one of the other commissioners, or both other commissioners, are content on reducing the sheriff's budget.
So Commissioner,
But
what you're asking is the actions that you took to reduce the 2020 budget. correct?
Yes.
Which we reduced the ER&R funding.
Which we gave a thumbs up or thumbs down.
So that decision point on the 2020 is coming up, is not today.
Well, even so, if we give a thumbs up on this proposal, that pretty much guarantees this robbery of the ER&R fund, which I think is detrimental to the overall operation of the sheriff's office. If we were allowing the 2% reduction to come out of this, and that would be the credit that he would get, then I'm open to discussing that.
my question is, typically we'll see when there's direction needed, we'll see an option 1, 2, or 3. But what I'm hearing is it's an option, what you're looking for direction is either thumbs up or down. And I see, for example, the ER&R rates of 5.7% increase change for 2021 and 3.1 for in 5420 fund. And so we're looking at giving you a thumbs up or down on all the proposed rate increases rather than any options or variations thereof.
Robin, can I make a clarifying statement here?
Thank you, Bruce.
So I saw your note. So apparently the ER&R rates are from prior to the board's final decisions on the reductions. So they are not the money, the $650,000 that the board has directed us to reduce from the 2020 rates are not reflected in this proposal. Is that correct, Bruce? Yep.
Okay, so that being said, then there's plenty of time to review the direction as far as reducing the 2% and where that might come from out of individual offices.
Yeah,
Is that
that is
right?
coming up.
You have,
Okay,
you have,
That's coming up
yes,
next.
you have that time. Even if that was built into these rates, you still have that time for review.
okay, good enough. Just wanted to clarify that.
Because the 2% reductions, the you asked for offices and departments is due tomorrow.
Okay,
So there's gonna be a follow-up briefings with the board to determine whether you want to include that. And at that point, you start the board making decisions as to how you would like to implement the 2020 reductions.
okay.
So one final question for me, and I'll get to you, Ty, if you have anything. Looking at the proposed rates for like the IT fund, 5250 for operations, 5.5 increase. We see all these central services total 20.6% increase. Are these sustainable at this point in time, or we just give you a thumbs up, knowing that we're going to end up reducing it considerably?
Can I speak to, and it kind of talks about what you guys were talking about before. We had to do a point in time when we were developing these rates. So we couldn't, I mean, there's obviously still decisions on what the cuts are going to be. And yeah, we'd have to go back and readjust those, but we couldn't, you wouldn't want us putting cuts in there that's not agreed upon yet, because that would kind of be making a decision that's out of our authority.
That's a good point, Dennis.
Okay, so I'm just looking at these increases. As we're cutting budgets, I'm looking at these giant, for my head, giant increases, and know that we need the money for these rate increases. The money is needed, but I just don't know if it's realistic or sustainable.
Well, I might follow up on that. Is it realistic or sustainable if we did not reduce that budgetary amount from the ER&R fund that the sheriff oversees when it comes to vehicles? And I'm thinking that could be about a $400,000 hit, is it? I really don't know that number off the top of my head.
And I don't know if it's compounded next year. Commissioner Menser, you had a comment?
Yeah, my comment or question was kind of piggybacked on yours. Just I'm not interested in reviewing the ER&R policy we set, but when I see like a 20.6% increase central service rate, you know, that jumps off the page a little bit. I guess my question is, Is that unprecedented? Is that gonna create, how much of a problem is that going to create for our different offices and departments building their budgets next year? Is this just off the chart crazy, and should we be thinking about scaling it up, or does this come and, rise and fall, and this is something that is not atypical?
So the 20% is mainly driven by the increase that is needed in building reserves.
I saw that.
And there is a large general fund impact to this because the building that is included in these rates that need so much repair is the FJC, and it's a general fund supported building. So if we were to take out the building reserves, the rate increase in central services would be minor and quite in keeping with prior years. What we don't have, you heard Dennis talk a little bit about a rebate. Central services, most of central services would usually have a rebate, but what we found is in 2019, we collected about as much as we spent. So there is no rebate in central services. And I know that probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but basically without the building reserve, the increase is a normal rate increase.
So just let me state something and then you check me if I've got it right. So it seems like we should adopt the rates because that creates an accurate conception of what these things cost. And then the Superior Court, which might be most affected, is going to take that and go, oh my gosh, and they're going to build that into their budget proposal. And then the commissioners can react accordingly by potentially increasing their budget so that they can afford the amount of the building reserve. I mean, is that a good way of thinking about this?
Almost, you're close. By approving these rates, you are approving increasing these budgets. We would increase every office's and department's budget to pay for the increase in these rates. This is a budget increase decision.
So I guess the bottom line is I haven't heard, so I'm asking if there is one, an argument, a good argument to be made for not adopting these new adjusted rates. Can anyone make a good argument that I need to consider?
I'll make a comment to that, and that is that I'm looking at that 20.5 or 20% increase that jumped out at me as well, and all the other increases, and I'm thinking, how are we going to do unless we inflate? I don't mean inflate in a negative way, but increase the budgets for the offices and departments to pay for this. It won't happen. And I'm thinking what kind of soundbite that looks like. That, hey, we're increasing budgets all across the board. At the same time, I'm looking at if money goes into central services, into ER&R, all these different funds, is that like a false? It's like a pretend reserve or emergency fund that we can take from when we need it for other items or for budget cuts. We'll just take from that fund.
Commissioner, let me follow up on that statement that you're bringing up. But I mean, when we talk about these proposed rates being increased, we're talking about central services 20%, but we're talking about the building reserve at 65% increase. And boy, am I disappointed in that for a building that's 22 years old. And the population of the juvenile folks incarcerated there has been steadily reducing over the last 15 years. Right now, there's 80 empty beds sitting over there. Now, I know there are other activities going on in that building, but I guess I'm disappointed in myself as well, because I've been here for 3 years now trying to pay attention. And I didn't know we were going to try and pump $5 million into a building that's only 22 years old. That to me says that there must not have been any maintenance during that 22-year period. So,
Okay, well, we have 2 minutes, Gary.
Okay.
Let Robin answer up these questions here.
So,
Go ahead, Robin.
in response to that, had over the course of 22 years, someone been putting sufficient money in each year to have the maintenance of that building, we wouldn't suddenly need $5 million for these repairs. If it had been spread over 20 years, we would have been contributing a few $100,000 a year. But the amount contributed toward repairs of all of our buildings has been insufficient to maintain them. And these critical systems are now breaking down. That's why it's so expensive all of a sudden.
well, I'm almost
So-
questioning if we shouldn't do a remodel on that thing for a
Well,
completely
that's
different use.
Options A and B and what the options are. We're ending the briefing now. And you have to have, what happens if you get a thumbs down or if we can't decide right now, what happens?
We could postpone the decision till Tuesday, like we often do. If you do not approve the increase in the rates, then our offices and departments will have to figure out a way to mitigate the increase in costs, because the things that are increasing are things that are out of our control.
Okay,
I mean,
Good.
if you think about it, we're being asked to increase this almost 100% is what it adds up to. When you
Robin,
add
go ahead.
everything up.
You can certainly choose to not contribute money into building reserve. That would bring the cost down substantially. But when the system breaks, we will need to find the money somewhere.
Well, I'm not arguing that. You're perfectly right, I'm sure. But the county government as a whole obviously has not paid any attention to this since that building was built. So we're part of the problem because we've been here, this board's been here, what, a year and 3 years, so, and we haven't picked up on it either. But I cannot support, at this point in time, 100% increase in ER&R at the same time we're telling the public the sky is falling.
so let me wrap this up, Gary, if you can, if you'll let me. Because if it's almost like a no-win, if we vote this down, not today or even Tuesday, we vote it down, the increases, then we'd be accused of, oh, you need a new building because you're not funding to take care of your current buildings and you're losers. And so it's not a win that way. But it's not a win also by just blatantly taking, not blatantly, but what we're looking at. I'm at least in this point, if I can kick it to Tuesday, I'm willing to kick it to Tuesday to give this much greater thought and have more questions answered. So let's give it up to my seatmates. Do you want to go up or down or sideways? You want to wait? Are you okay with waiting till Tuesday?
I'm okay with waiting for Tuesday, but
Go
I'm
ahead,
not gonna
Ty.
vote for it now.
I'm
Go ahead,
fine waiting till Tuesday. I want to hear somebody articulate, though, the argument for delay and what the alternative plan looks like. I really haven't heard that, so I'll need
Okay.
that in order to feel like there's that there's a responsible alternate path.
Okay. So Robin, your team can come back with some type of a scaled down version perhaps or something that's more palatable?
We can certainly work on something, Commissioner.
Okay. Good
I
response.
know that it will be more palatable.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that will be very difficult to define what palatable is.
Yeah, got it. And everybody has different tastes. All
I
right. So thank you. We'll wrap this up. Romero, you want to wrap it up and bring it back Tuesday?
I think
Yeah.
Commissioner Menser had something to add.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just really want to make the point that this completely undercuts the arguments that were being made that the county was not maintaining buildings 1 through 3 in order to manufacture a basis for a new courthouse. As you can see, we had a brand new building and we weren't able to meet the needs of that building either. We certainly weren't trying to undercut our brand new or relatively new family and juvenile court. So all of those arguments were pretty much frivolous, as this evidence just
Thank you for
shows.
that. Yeah. Okay, then thank you. We're going to end this briefing and move on to the next one after about a 3-minute break.
Commissioner, we need 10
Yes.
minutes to prepare for the next meeting.
10 minutes. Thank you much. 10 minutes. We'll be back at 10. Just make it 10:15. We'll be back for the next briefing. Thank you all.